All right, hello guys. Welcome back to another video lecture. This is going to be on biology, and in particular, we're going to be looking at the chemistry of life. So this is the very first unit of AP Biology if you're taking the course. And this video lecture is going to act as a comprehensive review of the unit. We're going to go over all the key information and all of the concepts. And also, if you're just watching this as an introduction, that is totally fine as well. So also, I wanted to mention that this video lecture is going to be split up into two distinct parts because it's probably going to be, since there's a lot of information, it's probably going to be a long video if I just recorded it all in one setting. So it's going to be in two parts, but without a further ado, let's get into the first part of the chemistry of life. So I'm going to be exploring a little bit about water and then also a little bit about macromolecules. So let's get into it. All right. So the very first molecule you'll encounter in biology, and the most important that you'll be talking about, is water, H2O, in other words. So before I get into the specifics of water and its unique properties, let's take a look at this diagram that I have, two diagrams, I should say. So one is just one water molecule in its molecular form. So as you can see, you have two hydrogen atoms and one big oxygen guy here. And also you can note that there are these symbols with plus and the oxygen has a minus. That just means that oxygen has a net negative charge and the hydrogen atoms have a net positive charge. But of course, well, what's the significance of those positive and negative charges? Well, oxygen is more electronegative than the hydrogen atoms. So that means that it hogs more of the electrons towards itself. And if you took chemistry, and if you have a little bit of knowledge in chemistry, since oxygen is a little bit more electronegative and hogs more of the electrons, that means water is a polar molecule. It is polar. And its polarity gives water really its unique properties. But before we move on to the specifics of those properties, I also want to examine this diagram I have with like these multiple water molecules, and it shows these weak bonds. And these weak bonds are known as hydrogen bonds. But I want to not only emphasize the type of bond between the water molecules, which I just mentioned was hydrogen bonds, but how does water bond to itself? So if you see here that, of course, the hydrogen atom here, there's a dashed line connecting to the oxygen atom. So the way that hydrogen bonds to other water molecules is when the hydrogen atom bonds to the oxygen atom. And that's how they get connected. And that kind of makes sense because opposite charges attract and like charges repel. So the hydrogen atom, as we saw with the delta positive charge, is attracted to the delta negative charge of the oxygen atom there. So kind of like a simple recap here, water is polar. It is connected with other water molecules through hydrogen bonding, and hydrogen attaches to the net negative charge of the oxygen atom when they are connecting to other water molecules. Now let's kind of explore the unique properties of water. So there are several different properties. We have high heat capacity, surface tension, as well as cohesion and adhesion. So let's examine high heat capacity here. So what does that mean? What is high heat capacity? So high heat capacity just emphasizes that water essentially takes a lot of energy and heat to raise water's temperature. And essentially, again, there's a really, I guess, systematic definition for this, but all you need to know is that a lot of energy and a lot of heat is required to raise the water's temperature by 1 degree Celsius. But the significance of high heat capacity of water is that a lot of the marine organisms, or basically living organisms in water, they have a limited range of tolerance, or a particular range of tolerance. So considering that it takes a lot of temperature to raise water, the temperature of water, it's great for these organisms to just, again, be in a subtle environment and be in a balanced environment. So that is a huge advantage. Also, we have surface tension. So surface tension just means that if you know what are called water striders, if you see those insects, and you can also search them up, basically they can walk on water. So that kind of, again, it's kind of a benefit to those organisms that it allows them to kind of, again, walk on water. Water can actually take, I guess you could say, pressure a little bit of pressure before it can really break. But just that it has surface tension allows really insects, for example, to kind of walk on water and, for example, just travel along water, which is a cool and unique property. And then along with its polarity that defines water, I really want you guys to consider cohesion and adhesion. These are really, really important properties of water. So cohesion just emphasizes that water binds to itself. So water molecules are attached to each other. And this diagram that I spoke about just a couple of seconds ago or minutes ago emphasizes this, because as I mentioned, water is connected to water through hydrogen bonding. And then adhesion, you're probably wondering, what is that? What is adhesion? Adhesion just emphasizes water's ability to stick to other surfaces. So not just to water itself, but for example, you could see water, I guess, water on your car's surface, for example, or on the window. Again, it has that capability to not only bind to itself, but to other extraneous surfaces as well. And this action of cohesion adhesion gives capillary action. And we'll kind of explore that in the next slide. That just actually is a benefit to plants. And again, we'll examine what that is. All right. So as you can see, I have a little bit of few diagrams here, pictures, I should say. So as I mentioned, capillary action just a few moments ago, you can see on the very left diagram here that it says water moves upward by capillary action. So this is very, very beneficial for plants and just plant organisms to absorb water through their roots. So through the action of both cohesion as well as adhesion. So adhesion could be, for example, if a plant is taking up water, the water is moving up and sticking to the roots surfaces. And then cohesion will, as water is going up the roots, it's also just binding to itself, binding to other water molecules. So that action of cohesion and adhesion combined results in capillary action. And that allows water to move up to the plant's roots, which is, of course, essential for their growth. And then also I emphasize, again, adhesion and cohesion. This diagram kind of does a good job of showing that cohesion, water is holding the hand of another water molecule, and adhesion is just holding another surface area, essentially. And then another actually really cool property of water is that water, when it turns into ice, it floats. So ice becomes less dense than water itself, although ice is pretty much water in a different state, in a solid form. But how is that? How does that work? Well, if you see here that in its liquid state, water is just all bunched up together. All the molecules are really tightly connected. They're not spread out. But on the other hand, over here, you can see that all the water molecules are kind of in this, I guess you could say, ring structure, but this emphasizes that water spreads out. The molecules are spread out. And that's why water becomes less dense in its solid state as ice. And hence ice floats, because if it's less dense than water, it gives its property of floating. But what's the significance of ice floating? Well, moving back to kind of the idea of and concept of benefiting organisms, since ice floats on top of water, it kind of insulates the water underneath. So again, it gives that subtle temperature for organisms, even in really cold temperatures, to be in a subtle environment. So since ice floats on top of water, it just still insulates the water underneath, giving, again, that subtle temperature that maybe, again, fish organisms, just various marine organisms that they need to survive. All right, now we're going to move on to the section of macromolecules. So in terms of macromolecules, we're going to discuss the type of bonds, the monomers, and some of the unique properties of certain macromolecules. Okay, so let's talk about proteins. Really, proteins are just amino acids. The monomers of proteins are amino acids. Now, you're probably wondering, well, what are monomers? Monomers are essentially the building blocks of a certain macromolecule. So think of monomers as subunits, smaller subunits that make up the bigger unit of the macromolecule. So since amino acids are the monomers, since we have more monomers, more amino acids, the amino acids build up to a protein. So again, the amino acids are essentially subunits to building up to a protein. And when amino acids bind together, they form what are called peptide bonds in order to, again, form that complete protein. And you see here that there's this R group. So everything makes sense here. Of course, that's carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and stuff. But what is that R symbol there? R group is essentially a functional group to proteins, and it can have R groups can be actually be defined in other macromolecules, but in proteins, it gives proteins unique properties. Of an R group on a protein could be, for example, a methyl group. And the methyl group is CH3, and it gives the protein a hydrophobic kind of property. And hydrophobic just means that it is water repelling. So R groups just give proteins the, again, certain properties. For example, a protein can be hydrophilic, hydrophobic, and so on. So just think of R groups as an extra means of uniqueness or a property that it gives proteins to. And then also I wanted to discuss how proteins bond or amino acids bond to form, again, a protein. So if you see the carboxyl group, which is this C and this double bond between the oxygen, as well as this hydroxyl group, bonds to this amine group. And the amine group is this nitrogen bonded to these two hydrogens here. And when they bond together, they form this product, which is a protein. And you can see here that the C, the carbon, is bonded to the nitrogen here. So keep that in mind if you're considering, or you're actually defining, for example, a problem where it says, is this a protein? Just look for that bond between the carbon and the nitrogen, as the carboxyl group and the amine group are connected together during that process. All right, so that concludes the very first part, guys, of this video lecture. So next, we're going to be covering carbohydrates, phospholipids, lipids, and also nucleic acids. So we'll be covering those in the next lecture, finishing up the lecture in terms of macromolecules. But until then, I hope you guys enjoyed this very first part. I hope it was informative. And if you guys have any other questions, of course, please feel free to contact me and or comment down below, and I'll be more than happy to help you guys out. But until then, see you in the next part, guys. Thank you.